The following documentary is a snapshot of 2 decades of research by the author of Structure of Everything within all fields of science in order to validate his ideas of a single generic pattern that applies to everything in the universe. This research has revealed answers to questions that until now have been a mystery. Questions such as the following. Is there a correlation between consciousness and the cosmos? What is the true nature of reality? And do we have free will? The generic model reveals a single system that everything complies to, without exception. The evidence is all around, it's just a question of how you look at things. The only way that the generic pattern is visible in everything is through the cipher. Compartmentalization. Everything we label is a unit within itself. From the universe as a whole, down to quantized bits, there are units within units, such as harmonies in a choir, or the elementary particles that make up everything in the universe. In physics, a fundamental interaction, depending on the nature of the interaction, it might also be called a fundamental force, is a process by which elementary particles interact with each other. An interaction is often described as a physical field, and is mediated by the exchange of gauge bosons between particles. The structure of everything hypothesis goes far beyond this definition, with its generic model, which is the structure of interaction, and is fundamental in all things. The generic model is symmetrical, and is the most basic structure known to man. It is the structure of a single unit of interaction. It can be expressed in the following way, for simplistic purposes: 1 + 1. The plus sign represents the third dynamic part within the triad structure. It is responsible for any influence or change in things, as well as attraction or repulsive behaviors. It is also responsible for all reactions, in all things. The generic model highlights the importance of the third dynamic part, because without it nothing happens. Without the third dynamic part, nothing can be measured, mathematics ceases to exist, and the universe would be void of any matter, because the Higgs boson would not be able to interact with particles, giving them their mass. Without interaction, no structures can form nor can any information be exchanged. Everything is a process, and there's always something else involved, and what drives everything forward is the third dynamic part. There could be a million reactions happening in a system, all at the same time in a single event. In order to identify the generic model, you must first isolate each one separately, analyze them, and it will reveal itself. From one mutation to the next, within evolution, this fits the generic model. Examples of the generic model. This is the standard model in physics. Note that it is split into 3 sections: quarks, leptons and bosons, force carrier particles. The force carrier particles are the equivalent to the plus sign in the generic model. They are the third dynamic part between 2 points. Sir Isaac Newton, a genius and giant in the world of science for centuries. Newton's laws of motion. First law: an object at rest will stay at rest, and an object in motion will stay in motion at a constant velocity, unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Second law: force equals mass times acceleration. Third law: for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Each of the 3 laws fit the generic model. The generic model. Two things that are affected by a third dynamic interacting part that produces a consequence. 3 is the magic number. Between 2 points, there is always a third dynamic part, as laid out in the generic model. The point of this exercise is to hopefully show you a way of looking at things in a way that you wouldn't normally do. Here are just a few examples, which are essentially all the same thing: wave, frequency, vibration, linear time, length, spatial dimension, dispersion. 3 is the magic number. The family unit, like everything else, fits the generic model. Man, woman and sexual intercourse, which is the third dynamic part in this triad structure. The consequence, of course, from this single moment of interaction is a child. The child will grow up to be an adult, and possibly become a participant in the whole process of human reproduction, ensuring survival of our species. The act of sexual intercourse itself fits the generic model, and the consequence of this act is ejaculation. The sperm's journey towards its final destination triggers chemical reactions along the way, none more so than the reactive response, to enable the sperm to gain access into the egg. The whole process fits perfectly into the generic model. At the very moment when the 2 sets of the 23 pairs of chromosomes split and join together, one half from the male and the other half from the female. This is the very moment of human creation, our Big Bang if you will, which fits the generic model. The image that you see is of two different situations. Both comply structurally to the generic model. On the left, the spread of coronavirus, which occurs from transmission through person to person, which is highlighted as the dynamics with the red plus sign. On the right, social distancing. The dynamics in this case is the distance, a barrier between people, which is also highlighted with the red plus sign. The generic model structure is fundamental in all things. Nikola Tesla. Probably the greatest practical genius that ever walked on the planet. He is attributed with many quotes, and probably the two most famous quotes that he is said to have made. Both quotes have the answers to the questions he posed. Once you understand what you are looking for, you will see the answer with the greatest of ease. Here are the two quotes and an explanation of how the answer was achieved. If you only knew the magnificence of the 3, 6 and 9, then you would have a key to the universe. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency and vibration. Most people are obsessed with these numbers. However, the answer is not in the numbers, but how the numbers are structured. The exact same applies to energy, frequency and vibration. Both these triad structures fit perfectly into the generic model. The number 9 and energy are equivalents to the third dynamic part within the generic model. Each of the constituent parts of the triad structures all fit the generic model. The Pythagoreans, among whom Plato must be counted, perceived a fundamental relationship between proportion and the principle of justice, in which each part of the whole receives its proper due. They believed that the essential nature of justice could be understood through the study of continuous geometrical proportion, analogy, and through the study of mathematical ratios of the musical scale, in which the two extremes of the musical scale are bridged, interaction, through various types of mathematical proportion. This bridge is the third dynamic part between the two extremes and thus fits the generic model. Pure speculation on the author's behalf. The author believes that the ancients built stone monuments because of the importance of the structure of everything. The author also believes that the megalithic structures at Stonehenge are a perfect representation of our solar system. The large stone trilithons that surrounds the site are a perfect example in stone of the generic model. This is how everything is connected. The concentric circles within the monument correspond with our solar system. The embodiment in nature of the generic model is the summer and winter solstice, the spring and autumn equinox, and Orion's belt. The pyramids of Giza are another perfect example of the generic model, and the Great Pyramid is the equivalent to the third dynamic interacting part between 2 points. Obviously, this is pure speculation on the author's behalf. However, these ideas are as good as any other explanations previously put forward. If energy cannot be made or destroyed, then energy is, and always was. Through the author's research in modern neuroscience, and through his own observations, his findings are as follows. Consciousness and reality go hand in hand. They are part of a structural unit that complies to the generic model. Consciousness is the dynamic interface with reality, and like all interfaces, they are the dynamic interacting part between 2 points. The human body as a system is a carbon copy of the cosmos, in the fact that everything is reactive without exception. Our perceptions are derived through our 5 senses, and they all are triggered through vibration. Vibration fits perfectly into the generic model. In order to see the generic model in things, you need to compartmentalize everything. Our 5 senses, which are stimulated through interaction, send electrical impulses towards the brain. All such impulses go on a journey from one part to the next, like a domino effect. You could use the analogy of a relay race, passing a baton from one runner to the next. The start and end point of each stage of the journey is a single unit of interaction and fits the generic model. Once the brain receives information, the brain's response is reactive, and the relay baton race continues, and so the process is repeated again and again. Influence equals interaction. We are all slaves to the reactive nature of Mother Nature, and her greatest weapon in her arsenal is influence. This applies to everything in the universe, without exception. We as humans believe that we have free will, because we make choices. However, any choices that we make are completely influenced, one way or another. This gives the illusion of free will. Memories are potential influences, which are like everything else, reactive. Trying to avoid influence is futile, and the knowledge that our every actions are influenced is an influence in itself. Influence is internal or external. We spend every waking moment moving from one influence to the next, blindly and seamlessly, unaware that these compartmentalized moments even exist. Each compartmentalized section is defined by the start of each new influence, which is a single unit of interaction, and this fits the generic model. It is not your free will that decides what you do, but you are a slave and constantly react to the influences that surround you. The same system applies to everything within the cosmos and our nervous system, because everything is reactive. The evidence is all around. It's just a question of how you look at things. Each one of these moments between each influence is a single unit of interaction, which fits the generic model. Energy, frequency, and vibration, as a triad structure, fits perfectly into the generic model, and as separate units, they comply. Our reality is a consequence from interactions with our senses, which determines all that we experience. The author's conclusion: everything comes down to a single point of interaction.